Xbox versus PlayStation, Mario versus Sonic, Peach emoji versus eggplant emoji. We all have our taste, but some of them are wrong. Today I want to go through every single console generation and determine which is the best for said generation. I'm going to try and keep things objective, but you're probably going to disagree with me at some point in this video, so go ahead and drop your rankings down below. Also, I was born in 1998, so I don't want to talk about consoles I never got to experience, such as the SNES or NES. I just don't feel like I'm qualified. That being said, we're going to go ahead and start with... In my most influential video games video, almost half of those games on that list were N64 games. And that is no coincidence. This generation was also Sony's first attempt at joining the console war with the PlayStation 1. And to be fair, it was a solid attempt, but only that. Amazing franchises such as Crash Bandicoot, Gran Turismo, and Tomb Raider were born here. But there was just no catching up or even like attempting to take down the behemoth that was the Nintendo 64. The Nintendo 64 completely shattered the barriers for what was possible for video games. And what better way to showcase that than launching alongside the most influential video game of all time, being Mario 64. The 64-bit processing power was really being pushed to its limits and upped the ante for every other console competitor out there. But what really hammers this home as the best console this generation is all the exclusives. You have Ocarina of Time, which started the 3D Zelda game franchise, which to me is probably like the best gaming franchise that has ever existed. Mario Kart 64 and Mario Party created games that literally anyone could play and also spawned several successful sequels. For the most part. GoldenEye essentially created split-screen PvP FPS gameplay, and then Superman 64 acts as the best superhero video game to date. The Sega Saturn was also here and just kind of existed. I really don't have any type of opinion. I never got to play one, but I'm gonna go on a limb here and say it's probably not better than Nintendo 64 or the PlayStation 1 for that matter. But if you think otherwise, go ahead and let me know. I think Sony and Sega just couldn't hang with the exponential success that the N64 was having, and then with every waking moment of its life cycle continued to do everything right with just better games and just saw exponential success. Now we're starting to get to the point where the console wars like really began. Microsoft has now entered the chat with the original Xbox and courted the more mature and gritty audience. The Halo franchise debuted here and also pretty much birthed the PvP online multiplayer experience with Xbox Live. In the meantime, the Sega Dreamcast launched in between this generation and the one we were just talking about, so I wasn't really sure where to factor it in. But I know for a fact it's definitely not the best one of this generation. The Nintendo would launch their 65th game console, being the Nintendo GameCube, and this one hits extra home for me because this was the first gaming console I'd ever owned. But I'm not gonna let the nostalgia glasses blind me here. I know this isn't a perfect console, but still had a really good like exclusive lineup, which we all know is a trend with Nintendo games. Here we have like Metroid Prime, Wind Waker, Smash Melee, which has done like a lot for the gaming scene. But outside of that, there's just better ways to experience the games that launch on all three of these platforms, and the best way for that was the PlayStation 2. This is one of the greatest consoles to have ever grazed the open market. It ain't the best-selling console of all time for no reason either. Sony wasn't playing when they launched the PlayStation 2, and they successfully captured the most broad audience. The damn thing could read DVDs, which was all the rage back then. So when you're tugging your dad's pant leg about wanting a PS2, the dual convenience of a gaming console and DVD player in one, which mind you, the price of a DVD player was like sometimes more than a PlayStation 2, it was a no-brainer. Might I add, this is one of the biggest like let me put my dick on the table moments Sony has ever had. You want to play Sly Cooper and then Jack and Dexter, then when you get bored pop in Aaron Brockovich in the same exact console? You can totally do that for only 300 bones at that. On top of this, the life cycle of the PS2 stretched 13 years. Yeah, released in 2000, and one of the last games released for the PS2 was FIFA 14 in 2013, which yes, it is the worst way to play FIFA 14, but they wouldn't release it if people didn't buy it. And also a crazy fact is that FIFA 14 released on the PS2, PS3, and PS4. That is an achievement in and of itself, and kind of up there with like Skyrim releasing on 10 different platforms in a decade, but in a much better way than that. Although Nintendo and Xbox were doing well this generation, the PS2 takes the cake for this one, and it's not even really all that close. The only argument I can see is that Xbox kind of pioneered the whole online capability with consoles, especially with Xbox Live. We all know the GameCube and the PS2 had online capabilities, but it was not near as fleshed out or like in your face as the Xbox was. But even that is not enough to compare to the PlayStation 2. This was the most difficult entry on this list. And also, this was the one generation where I owned all 3 consoles simultaneously during the peak of their relevancy. So yeah, you could say sleepovers at my house in 2008 were pretty wild. Let's go ahead and talk about one of the most well-known consoles of all time, being the Nintendo Wii.
We would like to play.
Gaming was already well known by pretty much everyone at the time, but that didn't necessarily mean that everyone played. And then Christmas 2007 happened and you got your ass kicked by your grandma on Wii Tennis. The whole marketing for the Wii was brilliant and actually had games for everyone, except for actual gamers. Not that that's a bad thing by any means, but the Call of Duty sweats aren't exactly going to be entertained by Just Dance and Boogie for an entire console generation. But anyways, that broad audience and wide demographic that the Wii appealed to was like a complete cultural phenomenon. Everyone remembers the holiday season during the Wii's craze where it was really hard to get your hands on one, and it was the first time we had seen such a high demand for anything gaming related. I remember when we got ours for Christmas, my mom gave me Twilight Princess on the Wii, and we didn't have a Wii at the time, and I explained to her there was backwards compatibility with GameCube games on the Wii, and she was like, oh no, I thought this like Wii game could play in your GameCube. And so she was playing all dumb, right? And so we were all like, oh, it's okay, mom, you know, we can take it back and get it for the GameCube. And then in a M. Night Shyamalan twist of fate, she pulled out the Wii Costco bundle and was like, hey, why don't we just use this Wii instead? And me and my sisters just went feral. It was such like a big moment for us, like a very core memory of mine. That's how big of a deal the Wii is. Also, on a side note, my mom's a G for that. The infinite backwards compatibility that we had with the GameCube was really nice and definitely better than the limited backwards compatibility that PS3 and 360 had. And motion controls were a fun concept at the time, but in all honesty haven't aged the best, hence why I think the other 2 consoles were better at the time. On to the PS3, which had one of the most controversial launches when you consider that the Dinosaur First Edition PS3 retailed at $600 on launch day, which is ridiculous even for today's standards. I'm pretty sure that's somewhere around like $1,000 if it were to come out today, which like I'm pretty sure the PS5 like digital edition retailed at $400, which I remember hearing that and I was like, that's pretty nice. So the fact that the PS3 was equivalent to double that is mind-boggling. But hey, it came with the Blu-ray player, and that was kind of like similar like DVD player market scheme here. Was like those were like really hot back then. And once they came down in price, that was like the driving factor for our family to get one. I'm pretty sure my dad got a box Blu-ray set of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, but we didn't have a Blu-ray player. And then I think for my birthday, he like let me pay half of it, and he paid the other half so we could watch his movies. Well, we watched them together because Lord of the Rings is fire, obviously. Once again, I think Blu-ray players were about the same price, so Sony's really knowing what they're doing with this whole marketing. But outside of the Blu-ray player, the only other advantage PlayStation had was the PlayStation Network, and this was like their version of Xbox Live, and it was free, so that was like a really nice bonus. But that free experience didn't come with its caveat. As you remember, in 2011, PlayStation Network was hacked. This brought the servers down for anything online related for nearly a month. And I remember coming home from school about to do the Call of the Dead Easter egg, and we couldn't log in. And so like all of our friends were like, oh, our internet just might suck. Which it did. We had the same internet that when your home phone would ring, you just knew your game was totally chalked. If you ever experienced that, you're an absolute OG, by the way. And I don't want to go into detail about the hack. I mean, it's not that big of a deal. I mean, it did suck and it's crazy that it happened, but I'm not gonna like knock it too much for that. But one more strength that PlayStation had was the exclusives, and they were good, but just like not quite where they are today. I think this is, yeah, Uncharted 1, 2, and 3 were on the PS3, and The Last of Us. There's probably a couple others I'm missing, but Xbox actually had better exclusive, which is the only time I think I've ever said that out loud, which I'll go ahead and say I think is the best console of this generation. This was the true gamer's console. Xbox Live, Halo, and the Red Ring of Death, the ultimate package. While we're here, the Red Ring of Death was a terrible thing that happened. Like, it is like even worse than like Joy-Con stick drift today. The fact that it was just like, oh yeah, this is just like a thing that happens. And I'm not like some tech wizard guy, but the fact that they programmed the system to like show red ring, meaning like they knew that like this could happen to the I don't know, it just makes no sense. And the fact that it was like a problem forever, like to this day, those white Xboxes just will do this. But I do think this is where a lot of people's love for online gaming was born, myself included, and also really started the whole Xbox versus PlayStation argument. I know Xbox Live was a paid for subscription, which yes is cringe, but Xbox had party chat, which is one of the greatest things to ever happen to video games ever. You know, when you and your friend are just having that really good conversation and you're just like walking around jumping in Minecraft, not even playing the game, just like totally locked in on the convo. That was only possible on Xbox. And like I said, this is the only time the exclusives are better than the PlayStation exclusives. Halo, Mass Effect, Fable, and Gears of War were all just like totally cooking right now. They've all fallen off pretty hard, but at the time it was good, I promise. And later on in its life cycle, we got the Kinect, which again, motion controls are cringe, but was also a somewhat decent attempt at competing with the motion control craze at the time. And certainly better than the PlayStation Move. The competition was really stiff, but I really gotta give it to the 360 for the best console of this generation. sort of an honorable mention for this next entry, and that is the brief handheld race we had going on between the DS and PSP. No one really compares these two, but I think the DS had the PSP beat by a landslide. I mean, the Nintendo IPs just work way better on handheld, more so than like a grittier game like Call of Duty. There's also just like a ton of Pokemon games, and these are also recognized as probably the best Pokemon games. Then you have Mario 64 DS, which is just like a really good remake. Maybe it's not perfect, but still fun. And then even Zelda Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks are way better than any Sony IP on a PSP. Even later on when the PS Vita launched and Nintendo dropped the 3DS, I still think Nintendo dominated the handheld space. Just figured I had to throw some DS love before we get to the next one. Nintendo is now sort of branching away from generational consoles and kind of releases consoles whenever they feel like it. So we'll go ahead and talk about the Wii U. Unlike the Wii U had probably some of the worst marketing of all time. I think a lot of people were confused and saw this as like a Wii Pro or like a Wii with extra storage instead of as the standalone console that it was. With that in mind, this thing flopped despite having so much potential with the gamepad. I thought the gamepad was a really cool gimmick and like honestly in some ways better than the Switch. Also, the Wii U had HD and like the games on this console looked pretty dang good for the time. There were some decent games on here. Obviously, I've said Wind Waker HD is like one of the only 10 out of 10 games in existence. Smash 4 is one of my favorite Smash games. But outside of that, this console is forgettable. Also, I'm not factoring in the Switch with this generation because that wouldn't come out until like 2017, whereas the PS4 and Xbox One came out in 2013, so once again, just like an awkward release time. Anyways, we'll go ahead and talk about the Xbox One, and go ahead and put your trigger hats on because this is the worst console to ever hit the main market. And it's not even close. Remember the launch event at E3 for the Xbox One? The same event where they announced no backwards compatibility whatsoever, or you had to buy the bundle with the Kinect, or that you couldn't share games and when you bought a game, it was only available on your console?
This is how you share your games on PS4. Thanks.
Or how about that the damn thing wouldn't even work unless you were connected to the internet? Yeah, this thing was dead on arrival. I was actually living in the boondocks of Kentucky at the time, and we had like satellite internet, I think like HughesNet, which side note was a very dark time in my life. So I felt pretty attacked here, especially when they had this to say when people were giving them backlash.
I think people could have arguably gone the other way if we didn't do it, and fortunately we have a product for people who aren't able to get some form of connectivity. It's called Xbox 360.
Right. So stick with 360. That's your message if you don't, like it?
If you have zero access to the internet, that is an offline device. I mean, seriously.
I mean, yeah, I just cannot believe that they said this. It's a total like lick my boots peasant moment by Microsoft. This would mark the decline of Xbox, and we haven't even stopped talking about the Xbox One yet. The Xbox One had Halo 5, the Master Chief Collection, and Gears of War 4. Outside of that, there's just no incentive to own an Xbox One because the exclusives low-key sucked. And you can also run these games on PC. And look, I know this is a console video, but this is where I personally got a PC, and ever since I've got that, I've had no reason to own an Xbox. I mean, spending like $400 on an Xbox One when you could spend like 6 or 7 on like a mid or like low-end PC that can do the exact same things that an Xbox One could do, there's really just like no reason not to. And I know that's a significant amount of money, that's not like super easy, but to me, like, it really is worth it because it does even more than an Xbox One, honestly. The exclusives were completely going downhill, and also just like the console's performance overall sucked. And this is where I believe PlayStation began to run away with the bag. The exclusives were just getting out of control in the best way possible for Sony. Horizon, God of War, Ghost of Tsushima, The Last of Us, Uncharted 4, Bloodborne, and Spider-Man are all way better than any Xbox exclusive these days, and it's not even close. Also, that Xbox 360 party chat, now it's on PlayStation. How you standing out now, Mr. Phil Spencer? I think this is where Microsoft and Xbox were starting to take their foot off the gas and shift into more like purchasing of other game companies and emphasize more so like the business side of things, and also tried to like replace cable television and streaming services for whatever reason, and really stop giving a shit about the actual players and consumers. And now we're at modern day, where we can go ahead and talk about the Nintendo Switch, since that kind of released in the same window as the PS5 and Series X. Reminder, it was like a whole 3 years before. And the Switch is a fire console, but it really is overstaying its welcome at this point. Nintendo's whole thing is casual gamer and exclusives. So when you're talking about it in comparison to the PS5 and Series X, it's like comparing apples to oranges. The Switch 2 could release later this year, and apparently there's a deal with Activision saying the next 10 Call of Duty games will release on the Switch, meaning it's gonna have to be pretty beefy to run this, so maybe it kind of like enters the more like professional gaming scene. I can't believe I just said that, nor do I really give a shit if it does, but you know what I'm saying. But the Switch is honestly its own entity, and to me hosts some of like my favorite games of the current generation. Both Zelda games, Smash Bros, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, I mean Mario Odyssey. There is just a lot to like here. But as far as the PS5 and Series X, I'm gonna go ahead and disclaim I don't own either of them. My roommate owns a PS5, so I have a little more experience with that, but as far as like an outsider's opinion on the situation, it's PlayStation all day once again. Basically the same old song and dance. As far as I'm concerned, the Series X is like a Starfield machine. Then the PS5 just comes with more exclusives. I mean, like the Spider-Man series is going crazy. I mean, it just feels like the right place to experience even games like Elden Ring, which are on all platforms. And then you also have Astro Bot, which just won Game of the Year, which is a PlayStation exclusive, and you can't even play that on PC. But as far as this generation, I'm gonna remain neutral. I'll let you all decide. Kind of like the SNES, I just don't feel qualified to talk about this. The Switch is the only one I've had like experience with at launch, and I really like that one, and I think it could be a contender, but go ahead and let me know down below. But that's the best console from every single generation of gaming, except for the ones I wasn't born for. Let me know if you agree with me or if you don't agree with me. I know a lot of you probably are going to be mad at me for some of these entries. Also, I know I didn't really talk about like the difference in controllers for each of these consoles, because I think for the most part, that's just like going to vary from person to person. It's totally like just pick your poison. But if you think one's better because of a controller, go ahead and let me know. Check out some of my other videos, and if you liked, leave a like. If you didn't, leave a dislike, and thank you so much for watching.